Nature, the setting. Let's take a close look at two poems. The first one is Garden by Caleb Parkin from The Fruiting Body, published October 2021 by 9 Arches.
Garden. Garden is a dull green square edged with earth. So we reform its boundaries, revise its curves, rework the turf, uncover the bottle top static of plastic, the crisp packet shrapnel, then this pipe packed with soil, which we pull at, which keeps going. Have you ever had a long hair stuck down your throat, half in, half out the body, the way you can feel the length of the esophagus? We pull the pipe, keep pulling, and it unravels somewhere under the redrawn map of this garden, coiled somewhere under there like an unkillable snake. Have you ever had a piece of spaghetti stuck down your throat, half food, half rope? And the pipe keeps coming, fills up the new round lawn, twists into an elaborate roller coaster of white-ribbed plastic stuffed with clay, the strata to the gut of the planet. The pipe keeps untangling. Have you ever had a thread stuck down your throat, as though your body was cotton and you were unravelling? The pipe keeps going, and across the fence we see the cul-de-sac sag, as though underneath it some structure, some underpinning is being unwarped, unwefted. But we keep tug a one-way warring with this pipe, one hand after another as it builds up around us, our heads meatballs on its unending linguine, on which we pull, keep tugging, sing a work song, a heave-ho hoist song. Have you ever had a cable stuck down your throat, half live, half inert, unconnected? And there goes the neighbourhood, fraying like an ancient rug. Have you ever had a pipeline stuck through your throat? There go sewer ducts, water mains, uncoiling under every garden.
Our next poem to help us think about setting is called But What Are These Woods Anyway? By Jason Allen Pysant, published in his 2021 collection, Thinking with Trees. This morning, I stood looking away as I listened to 3 dogs charge at me. I can't even tell you what they looked like because I never saw them. Only heard the rolling and growling, felt the breath, heard the searching of paws, and there is nobody else like me around here. I don't want my mother to say, I told you so. I can tell you now that there were 2 women standing on the slope, shielded by trees. These women call the dogs back frantically. They can't control them. No, they won't come back, and I feel their breath. I hear their breath on my calves. Meanwhile, all that time, I stand there pretending to look into the distance. I am actually looking into the distance while I pray to God. Let I not be a disfigured shape or body. Don't even know what kind of dogs they are. The walk through the forest was so peaceful, stepping in the black pulp, avoiding the runny bits, walking on the padding of leaves, looking at the squirrels jumping in the high branches, a sea of golden leaves falling into the lake, magpies squawking. Sorry about that. He's only a pup. You all right? I continue, meaning to enter the peace again. Heartbeat will take a time to return normal. The stream is breezy, a sound of branches, a moist, slippery path, leading everything away. I'm all right now. Let me always be all right. I don't want my mother to say, I told you so. So how is setting at the center of the narrative in these two pieces? In Caleb's poem, the setting is the subject of the poem. The garden is the setting and the subject. He speaks about what it's like to be the garden, what it's like to experience the garden. Whereas in Jason's poem, the setting, the woods, just happen to be the place where he encounters these three dogs. And so we hear about the woods, but we hear about them in the context of his meeting with these three animals, which we understand that probably if he wasn't in the woods, he would not have met them. So the setting again is central to the story, because without it, he probably would not have had this experience. In both poems, there's uncertainty. In Jason's poem, it's actually fear. The poet is totally afraid of these three dogs. In the garden poem, it's a bit more being resigned and saying it's dull. It's not what we think of when we think of the bright nature. The garden that this poet describes is not as fancy and as interesting as we expect it to be. The natural world versus the built environment. Now, these poems are very different in terms of the setting and how it comes across. Now, Caleb's garden poem is very much about the nature in his garden, but it's juxtaposed quite a lot with the built environment or our world. We hear about crisp packet shrapnel, we talk about plastic stuff. So these are things that come from our industries and our worlds that are mixed in with his description of the natural world. Now, Jason's poem is very much about the woods, about the natural environment, but also there's disruption there for him, and his experience of it is these dogs. Now, we think of animals as a part of nature, but actually, in his poem, I was left with the idea that actually when we domesticate animals and bring them into certain settings, are we actually disconnected or connecting to nature, from nature? And I think it's an important question to ask for this poet, who clearly does not like to be around unleashed dogs, is scared of them. But again, it's the question of thinking, what is uncertain? Things that we think of as certain and sure and comforting, dogs in the woods, right? But this poet has found something that's uncertain, something that's fearful about them. And again, reading these poems is a great way of kind of expanding and exploring different ways of one activity, walking with dogs in the wood, being experienced in different ways by different people. Now, how is the setting conveyed as a place of action in both poems? Well, in Jason's poem, we actually get stillness as well. It's important to see the stillness that we get when he says the dogs come and he's still and stares off into the distance. Now, so there's this stillness juxtaposed with the action of the dogs moving around and the women running after them to say, oh, don't worry, that's fine. Now, Caleb's poem is different in that the setting conveys the action because, again, it's the subject of the poem. So we keep hearing about, have you ever had a hair stuck in your throat? Have you had a cord stuck in your throat? And we get this idea of a cyclical movement of the garden, of the seasons, of the changes that happen in the garden through Caleb's poem. Again, the nature of both places, the way how the writers convey them is vastly different. But I don't think anyone could argue that both are pieces of nature writing because the elements of nature are so strong. How have both poets spoken about humans in nature? Now, Jason's poem is very clear. The human at the center of the poem is very scared of what is happening, is scared of the dogs, and is in fact questioning their own mortality and saying, please, I don't want to turn into flesh. The other human that we hear about is it's the mother, the poet's mother. The poet says, please don't make my mother say, I told you so. So we get from this one line that this mother would not have been comfortable or as comfortable as the poet in this setting. She may not even have visited at all. Whereas we have a poet who is now uncomfortable in the setting, but has said in other points, I have not been uncomfortable. I come here for peace. I come here to relax. And this human recognizes that once the dogs leave, they can find that peace again in the place. So again, there's this element of things being unsure, but the human at the center knows that when they can control the setting in a way, they are quite happy in it. Now, Caleb's poem is very different with the human. The human is tied up into the garden space. And just as the poet asks about the garden being this coiling, cyclical thing, the person in the poem has this hair stuck down their throat, has a cord stuck down their throat, and again is going through this process of cyclical being. So whereas the setting is the subject of Caleb's poem, a human is still there, and we're still seeing the relationship and the comparison of nature and human life. Whereas in Jason's poem, the human has brought themselves into the natural space and then has to deal with the different experiences, whether they are good or bad. What words give hint to place? Now, Caleb's poem, with the subject as the garden itself, these words are strung right through the poem. We hear about cul-de-sac, we hear turf, we hear about neighborhood. So these words already let us know that we're in a built environment. But the garden itself, the words that related to the turf and the grass, let us know that this place is boxed in and it's its own wild place springing amidst a neighborhood, a cul-de-sac. So we get a residential area possibly. Now, both poems, the title give us a hint of place. Garden, what are these woods anyway? Jason's poem is quite descriptive in what kind of day it was in the woods. We know that there was the little puddles that he was stepping through, the leaves. These words all give description about what is happening in the place. A little stream, so we know wherever it was leading towards a water body or there's water running through it. And the types of trees he describes, we get an idea of what kind of place it was, what season it was in the woods. Now it's time for a writing exercise. Let's go back looking at our location list for our fruit bowl poems. And we're going to inject more of a sense of place into it. We want to extol the feel of the place by creating the world for the story or the poem to take place in. Now, add to your location list that we created before using some of the techniques that we've learned about in the 2 poems just a while ago. Now, is the setting the subject of the poem, or is it just the place that it happens in? So take a few minutes and edit your fruit bowl poem now.